We throw around these huge political terms all the time, right? Words like dictatorship. But how often do we actually stop and think about what they really mean? Today, we're going to dig into that, what a dictatorship actually is, and what makes it so uniquely destructive. We're going to unpack some really fascinating and honestly, pretty chilling analysis on this whole topic.
So let's just jump right in with the big question. What is a dictatorship? It sounds like a simple question, but believe me, the second you try to pin down a solid definition, things get, well, they get complicated really fast. And this quote right here, this really gets to the heart of the problem that our source material points out. We use these incredibly powerful words, dictatorship, democracy, as simple labels, but a lot of the time, we're just slapping them onto this vague, unclear something. So the challenge here is to move past our gut feelings and start looking for a real framework. All right, here's our roadmap for this journey. First, we're going to try to get a much better handle on what a dictatorship actually is. Then, we'll look at the three main ways they control people. After that, we dive into what the source calls the two fatal harms. First, how they twist people's beliefs, and second, the absolutely terrifying nature of their unlimited cruelty. And we'll wrap it all up by asking why this reality is so incredibly hard for the rest of us to see. Okay, first up, what is a dictatorship? Now, to really get into this, our source asks us to do something that's kind of tough. We have to try and put our own prejudices, our own preconceptions, on the shelf for a minute. The goal here isn't to judge, not yet. It's to understand the mechanics of what's happening. If we can look at this with fresh eyes, we can start to see a definition that's more than just a simple label. So once we get past that simple label, we can start to peek under the hood and look at the actual machinery of power. And that brings us right to our second section, the three forms of control. This is where we break down the different ways dictatorial power is actually built and maintained. The key thing to remember here is we're not just talking about one bad leader. We're talking about the systems they create to keep that absolute power. And the source really breaks this down into three main buckets. First, you've got your religious dictatorships, which are built around a single specific theology. Then you have party dictatorships, where one political party has a total monopoly on power. And finally, you have family dictatorships, where power is treated like a family heirloom passed down from one generation to the next. Okay, now this is where things get really interesting and a little weird. The source makes this pretty shocking claim that every system of power, even the most brutal dictatorship you can imagine, uses some kind of team, some structure that actually mimics democracy to control society. Now, these structures might be completely twisted or hollowed out, but the basic shape, the form, is still there. So understanding those structures is one thing, but what do they actually do to people? This question brings us to the first of the two fatal harms we're going to talk about, the creation of deformed beliefs. This isn't about laws or policies. This is about the deep psychological damage a dictatorship does, not just to a country, but to the very minds of the people living in it. To explain this, the source uses this really unique phrase, the belief function product. The easiest way to think about it is like a state-enforced mental operating system. It's this one, single, exclusive ideology. It could be religious, it could be political, that everyone is forced to adopt. And by doing that, the regime deliberately simplifies and ultimately damages people's natural ability to think for themselves. So what does that actually look like in day-to-day life? Well, as we just said, it cripples the ability to think critically, but it also creates this really specific social behavior, an overreaction. Citizens learn that they have to show these extreme, over-the-top emotional responses whenever the official ideology comes up. And here's the kicker. Even if you don't believe a word of it, you have to pretend to have that overreaction just to stay safe.
Now, corrupting the mind is a terrifying, internal kind of harm. But this second fatal harm, this is what truly defines a dictatorship on the world stage. It's unlimited cruelty. Our source argues that this is the real dividing line. It's not about the economy. It's not about the political structure. The ultimate difference, it says, boils down to this one chilling factor.
And to get this, we first have to realize that all modern politics is, in a way, a performance. With 24/7 media, cameras everywhere, leaders are always on stage. How they act, how they come across to their citizens, their public performance has become a huge, huge part of political life. And this is where that idea of performance really clicks into place, using this brilliant analogy. See, in a system where leaders are accountable, they're always being watched. They have to pay attention to their eating demeanor, so to speak. They have to behave for the public. But a dictator, they don't feel that pressure. They can just close the doors and enjoy their citizens however they want, with zero regard for how it looks. All the real cruelty happens behind that closed door, totally hidden from view.
And this is the absolute key point. The source is practically shouting from the rooftops here, saying we have to understand this. This cruelty isn't just some unfortunate side effect. It is a core, fundamental part of the system, and its capacity for cruelty is, and this is the important word, unlimited.
And this slide just lays out what unlimited actually looks like in the most horrifying terms. We're not just talking about oppression. We're talking about stripping people of their dignity and then demanding they say thank you. We're talking about taking actual pleasure from seeing fear in other people's eyes, killing for sport, and yes, even slaughtering huge percentages of their own population. This is the reality behind that closed door. Now, you might be thinking, a level of cruelty this extreme, it seems like it would be impossible to hide, right? And yet, so often, it is. And that brings us to our final critical section, the incomprehensible reality. We're going to look at why a reality this brutal is so often missed or just misunderstood by the outside world. And the answer, according to our source, is a masterful act of deception that happens on two separate stages. So here's the secret. The source claims that dictators are experts at running two completely different shows at the same time. They have one performance that's carefully designed for the international stage, for other countries, for the UN, for the global media. And then they have a completely different, totally hidden performance for their domestic stage, for what happens behind those closed doors.
And this idea just ties everything we've talked about together. The face they show the world is a carefully managed act. But the private reality, that domestic stage, that's where the unlimited cruelty is unleashed. The doors are shut, and that eating demeanor we talked about is completely forgotten. The world sees the curated performance, not the horrifying reality.
And so, that leaves us with this final, really challenging question. If the two fatal elements of a dictatorship, this deep corruption of the mind and this exercise of unlimited cruelty, are happening behind such a carefully built wall of deception, how can any of us on the outside ever truly recognize it for what it is? It's a pretty sobering thought to end on,